I thrifted this vintage Coach bag, and I'm going to show you the process I went through to get it looking brand new like this again. First thing I do at the thrift is just evaluating if it's worth something bringing home, and overall it wasn't in terrible condition, and because I was able to identify it as Coach and it was like iconic silhouette, I decided to go for it. And yeah, there are a couple notches missing, but I can just see after some conditioner this is going to look a million times better. And by no means would I consider myself an expert. This is great if you're just looking to get started at conditioning your bags. I'm just using a few basic products that you can also use on other leather goods like your shoes and whatnot. I use a saddle soap to clean the leather, as well as an assortment of brushes that helps me dry brush some dirt and buff later. And then the Bic 4 is that black container that I use to condition at the end, and any kind of microfiber cloth will do. The first step, which is easy to forget, is to just clear off any kind of loose dust and dirt. And with black, it's especially hard to tell just how much is on the bag, but it's so important. It just like wakes up the leather and really sets you up for getting the soap really into the grain. And really, you don't need a whole set of brushes. One brush will do, but it does help like when you have to go on the inside to have something smaller. And this bag really needed the interior cleaned. There's no lining on it, so it's like this suede kind of texture, so it's really easy for it to trap stuff in there. And I just use my vacuum to clean up those loose bits from the inside. This next step is perhaps the most nerve-wracking step for people. At least if you were on my TikTok and saw my original video, a lot of people were concerned about getting a leather bag wet. And yes, like you wouldn't want this to be out in the rain, and I do try to avoid dunking a bag only if it's absolutely necessary, because there can be some dye transfer, and absolutely I would not recommend doing this if there's lining on the interior of the bag because of the dye transfer. So this bag was the perfect candidate for getting it all wet because it is just leather throughout the entire construction. After the initial rinse, what I'm doing here is adding just some basic Dawn dish soap to get the outer clean. This is also a really great time to go in and clean all the brass hardware, and I just use brass soap for that. You could use a cloth, I just used a paper towel, and I've found that it actually really helps if the brass is a little bit wet before you use this product. It just works that much faster. Don't know why, but that's just been my experience. This is basically my favorite part. It's just so satisfying to see all that tarnish come off and the brass looks brand new again. After I've gone over all the hardware with Brasso, I do one final rinse to get all of it off, as well as any remaining soap. I use a bunch of rag towels to clean it off, and it's super important that you don't let this sit wet. You want it to dry out completely before you do the next steps. It's also super important to stuff the bag as part of the drying process, because not only are you drying it, but you're also reshaping it. So you're training the leather to just expand and give it like the memory of that shape. So I'm just using any kind of towels, or in this case some plastic bags, because that's what I had lying around, which were really nice to just get really tightly into those corners. This is definitely the hardest part for me, not because it's difficult, but I just am so impatient, and it's really hard for me to wait for these bags to dry out because they can take a couple of days. So I at least have it sit overnight, and I flip it occasionally, and I also change out the bags and towels if they get really saturated. I almost forgot about the straps, so while the body of the bag was sitting there starting to dry, I went ahead and then just repeated the entire process with the strap. Here's a side-by-side. This was the one I'd already used Brasso on, and here's the one that still needed it. A little hard to tell in the lighting, but it made all the difference. Then I made sure to lay it out purposefully how I wanted it to dry, so there I am, just kind of laying it out nicely. After the bag sat to dry overnight, I then went in the next morning with some saddle soap. And saddle soap is great if you want to skip the dunking altogether. This is where I would start if dunking makes you nervous. Or if you have a lighter color bag, in which case I would recommend using a saddle soap because the dye can't transfer, especially if there's lining on the interior of the bag. And this is where having that small round brush comes in handy, because I'm just taking small circular motions to really work the product into the leather. Then all I do is follow it up with my microfiber cloth and remove all of the excess settle soap. Then I just flip the bag over and rinse and repeat. I work on small sections at a time, and this just helps me remember which sections I've already done and just make sure I hit every side of the bag. This is also just super satisfying seeing how that leather, look at how much better it looks already, and I haven't even put the conditioner on yet, which is the next step. Almost forgot to do the strap again. I went back and did the hang tag as well. The second to last step is adding the leather conditioner, and here I am using a Bic 4 conditioner, and it's basically the same process I did with the saddle soap. Instead of using a brush though, I'm using my microfiber cloth to really work it in there. And I did forget the last final step, which is to use that brush that's on the table there. You just go over everything with that to buff it out for the final look. And here's the final bag. Its shape has been restored and it still has a beautiful worn-in look. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button and encourage me to make more videos because this is my first video. So bye for now.